Good morning, Mr. Arlinghouse. Today is Monday, the 23rd of April. No, that's not right. Monday, the 26th of April. Sorry. The important thing is that we are in our second day of talking about the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, trying to finish this mad drive to May the 7th. And so, yes, let's get down to business. I did want to show you a few pictures, Mr. Arlinghouse, that I have. Let's start with this one. Now, I don't know if, of course, you're saying, what in the world is this? Can you tell what kind of car that is, Mr. Arlinghouse, just by looking at it? Well, obviously, it's a taxi. I took this picture outside of our hotel in Berlin. The taxi is a Mercedes Benz. And it was Mercedes-Benz and BMWs were the standard taxis that I saw in West Berlin. In East Berlin, I hardly saw anything as far as individual vehicles. In fact, in Eastern Berlin, I'm going to shut you down for a minute and let you go here. Hang on. And we're back. Now, compare that picture I just showed you of a taxi in West Berlin. Compare it to this. This is the standard issue automobile of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. And yeah, that's a terrible looking vehicle. And although I took this picture in Budapest, Hungary, but I felt myself very fortunate to have found one of these vehicles. But you can see it's a little different from a Mercedes Benz. I also have a picture of what it would look like in pristine condition. I took this picture in Manchester, England, but I mean it looks like the same car when it was new. But yeah, it's called a Trabant or a Trabi. It was the standard issue automobile of the Soviet or the communist bloc countries, compared to a taxi cab in West Berlin that was a Mercedes or a BMW. Which is very indicative of the difference that developed between East and West Germany, Western Europe, and the Soviet Union. So another picture I wanted to show you was this one. The Soviet Union, as you know, took over East Germany and stayed there. And as you know, Mr. Arlinghouse, I had a unique chance to venture into East Germany and East Berlin. We played a soccer match there in 1989. We got our heads handed to us by an East German Olympic development team. What we were doing playing them, I had no idea. But when we went there, we went on a tour bus, an East German tour bus, and it took us around. And they had this one woman there, just extolling all the virtues of communism in East Berlin, and everybody on the bus knew that this is just embarrassing. How dismal and depressing. I mean, it was a Saturday; there was no traffic on the street, but they did take us in this tour bus to this park here, and I've often wondered if this park is still there. This is a monument, Mr. Arlinghouse, to Russian soldiers who died in conquering Berlin and Germany. Like I said, I wonder if that monument is still there today. Um, if it is, it's probably not well attended or well cared for, as you might imagine. But interesting, yeah. Um, and I think, oh yeah, one more picture. You might know. I don't think these guys are older than you. That's my assistant coach Nick Brake and one of my players Keith Laws. They were with me on that tour, and that is the western side of the Berlin Wall, and the whole thing looked like this. The whole, yeah, western wall, the western Berlin Wall. In fact, can't believe I didn't pull that up. Give me a sec. Berlin. Berlin, Berlin, Berlin. BER, and there it is. Photos. That's me, and that's my ex-wife, and yeah, that's a close-up of the Berlin Wall, and this is the Berlin Wall and no man's land. You see. By the way, on the eastern side of this wall, the wall looked like this. The western side, it was covered with graffiti. And this is no man's land. It was an area that was mined and had machine gun nests, and there were towers all around for observation to make sure nobody got through. About 1,000 people died. Well, let me get back to this. Let's finish, or let's proceed, shall we? Not there. Yes, there. So, soon the West, under the leadership of the United States, and the Eastern Bloc, under the guidance, either forced or otherwise, of the Soviet Union, faced off against each other in alliances. In March 1948, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, and Britain signed the Treaty of Brussels, which provided for cooperation in economic and military matters. In April 1949, these nations joined Italy, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, and Iceland, and to sign a treaty with Canada and the United States. How did I leave that out, Mr. Longhouse? And which came to be known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. A few years later, Turkey, Greece, West Germany joined the group. In May of 1955, the Warsaw Pact was formed with the Soviet Union, Poland, Albania, Czechoslovakia. Why did I write Albania twice? Bulgaria, East Germany, Hungary, Romania. That should be Romania. Under the very strong-handed leadership of the Red Army. And once again, here is your picture. This basically shows over here is NATO, most of these countries, and of course this is the Warsaw Pact countries. So yes. So the term Cold War has been used to apply to this era, an era when the flaming heat of World War II had been replaced by mistrust and animosity between the two major powers of the world. One of the possible flashpoints for global confrontation has been the Near East, and in particular Israel and its nearby Arab neighbors. Zionism, we've already went over that several times, Mr. Arlinghouse, the idea that there should be a separate Jewish state. But also do notice, Mr. Arlinghouse, particularly in this unit, that European history does become world history. Theodor Herzl and Chaim Weizmann founded Zionism. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 was a document endorsed by the British government saying there should be a national homeland for Jews in Palestine. Many Jews around the world began to flock to the land of Palestine, especially after World War II, to establish homes there, displacing the Arab-speaking Palestinians already living there. And see, that was a problem. The Yishuv, that was an uprising of Palestinians against the Jews. The horrors of the Holocaust in Europe probably did more to elevate sympathy for the Jewish cause than all the work of Zionists throughout history. In 1947, and I have no idea why this number looks like this. It looks terrible. And it looks like that again. In 1947, all right, I'm done. The British turned over to the United Nations the troubling question of Jews in Palestine. The UN declared that there should be an Arab state and there should be an Israeli or Jewish state in Palestine. Many Palestinian Arabs were displaced. That means they were pushed out of their homes. and became refugees. In May of 1948, the State of Israel declared its independence, and with the recognition of the United States, almost immediately were invaded by Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. The US and the Soviet Union were almost immediately drawn into this shoving match. Oil from Arab countries was a highly prized commodity in the West. And the United States, excuse me, Mr. Allinghouse. Where was I? So, yes, the United States established firm ties with Israel that last unto this very day. Up until the defeat of Japan in World War II, Korea had been a Japanese colony for the past few centuries. When World War II ended, the Korea was one Korea. Terrible. Korea was one of those parts of the old Japanese Empire that had to be administered over, and it had to be administered. The Soviet Union and the United States divided administration duties of Korea at the 38th parallel, 38th latitude. It was expected that the country of Korea would soon be reunited, but as with Germany, Cold War tensions got in the way. The southern half of Korea became a democratic style government under Syngman Rhee. If you ever wonder about that song by Billy Joel, Syngman Rhee, that's him, Mr. Allinghouse. In 1948, with the backing of the United States, and this became the ROK, the Republic of Korea, or better known as South Korea. The Soviet Union influenced the northern half of Korea with Kim Il-sung as its leader. The current president, Mr. Allinghouse, the little guy, Kim Il-jong, or whatever his name is, this is his grandfather. Yeah. Came as its leader, and this became known as the People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea. There were many border clashes between the two Koreas at first. In late June, man, I was just in a hurry when I wrote this. In late June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea and the United States intervened. Interesting thing about this that comes out, Mr. Allinghouse. You know, the United States in 1945 had the world's largest military. In 1950, that was gone. I mean, as I've talked about before, I actually watched a documentary about the Pusan perimeter, a confrontation between the United States and Chinese soldiers, and how the Americans were surrounded and cut off in the Pusan perimeter. And one of the big reasons for this, the United States just, after World War II, they dismantled their war machine, and they basically had a skeleton crew defending Korea. Didn't have anything near the amount of weaponry and soldiers under arms. And it says the U.S. intervened. The United States sent the lion's share of military aid and bore the brunt of the Korean War. Britain, Turkey, and Australia sent token forces. The UN Security Council voted in support of this action, and you would think now, Mr. Allinghouse, that the Soviet Union would have voted against that action, but the Soviet Union had walked out the day before because they were protesting some other issue. And so the Security Council voted in favor of the UN actually supporting South Korea versus North Korea, and the Soviet Union was not there to block it. Technically speaking, this was never a war, but a police action by the United Nations. By late 1950, General Douglas MacArthur's forces had forced the North Koreans literally almost to China. The communist Chinese, China at that time was ruled by communists, reacted as if this was a threat to their border, and they sent in hundreds of thousands of volunteers to drive back the Americans. And the Americans were driven back by sheer numbers. And the popular MacArthur was fired by Harry S. Truman because if you ever wondered who invented the saying, Mr. Arlinghouse, nuke them back into the Stone Age, it was Douglas MacArthur, because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to use nuclear weapons against the communist Chinese. And Harry Truman, because he wouldn't shut up, fired the man. The war dragged on for 2 years until a line began to stabilize once again back around the 38th parallel. For what it's worth, the Communist Chinese under Mao Zedong, were not working in cooperation with the Russians, with the Soviet Union, although most Americans believe they were. Actually, there was friction between the Soviet Union, the world's first communist country, and the Chinese People's Republic, the world's second. The Chinese were not going to let the Soviet Union tell them what to do. This actually worked to the Americans' advantage. But yeah, newly elected president Dwight David Eisenhower was elected on a campaign promise of bringing the boys home with an armistice signed on June 16, 1953. And that was accomplished. Although there remains to this day a major U.S. troop presence in South Korea. And to this day, the 38th parallel border remains one of the major flashpoints of a threat of international war, especially with that interesting character they have now ruling North Korea. If I were to go to North Korea and openly refer to Kim Il-jung as an interesting character, I would end up in a prison and not get out for quite some time, if then. I'm sure you know that. U.S. military advisors and diplomatic think tanks felt that the containment idea of holding back the spread of communism had worked in Korea as it had worked in Europe. Several things occurred which greatly affected the course of the Cold War. One thing, the great antagonist, Joseph Stalin, finally died in 1955. The Soviets pulled out of Austria in 1955. Why? Because that was one place where they didn't have support, and they felt they could stay militarily. Later in 1955, the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union held a summit conference at Geneva, Switzerland. There were many troublesome issues on the agenda, such as nuclear arms control, the future of Germany, and other things. Many people had high hopes for these talks, and it was called the Spirit of Geneva. In reality, not much was accomplished, except in these talks that they might meet again, and the Cold War soon heated up again. So, a lot of mistakes, Mr. Arlinghouse. Joseph Stalin had been a hardliner against the warmer relations with the West, and with his death came hope for easing of tensions between the Soviet Union and the USA. After Stalin died, the power of government was gradually placed in the hands of Nikita Khrushchev. While Khrushchev was not as repressive as Stalin had been, it was still an authoritarian style of government. Khrushchev did allow for some intellectual freedoms, which would never have been allowed during the Stalinist regimes. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote the book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which could actually be published. However, Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago was not allowed to be published. Khrushchev's Russia also tried to liberate the economy. The economy was turned ever so slightly in the direction of improving consumer goods, which had always been and will always be in short supply in the communist system, right up until, well, till today, actually, which then, this point, had been geared to heavy industry. However, during this time, the Soviets put the first unmanned satellite into space, which really shocked the when the Soviets put Sputnik into space. It just caused all sorts of ramifications to rain down on the United States. The idea that the Soviets could put something that would rotate around the Earth meant that it wouldn't be long. How long would it be before they armed that something? And so the United States not only got into the space race, but interestingly enough, Ms. Darlinghouse, the United States government, back in the good old days, began devoting all sorts of money to improving math and science education in this country. Yeah, lots of money was poured into public education. Lots of federal programs to improve education came out of that one incident. He tried to reform collectivism in agriculture to improve output, but eventually found Russia dependent on American wheat again. Khrushchev even went so far as to publicly condemn the policies of Joseph Stalin in the field of human rights violations. Speaking of which, not only Khrushchev, but Stalin's daughter talked about him like he stole something at one point in time. Members of Stalin's inner circle were gradually voted out of the Presidium, and the Eastern Bloc nations began to believe that they might have some greater leeway in their own affairs. This was a false belief, as we're going to see. In 1956, a crisis in the Suez Canal almost caused an international conflict. But oddly enough, this conflict put the United States and the Soviet Union on the same side. Gamal Abdel Nasser had seized power in 1952, took over the Suez Canal, which had been controlled up to that point by British and French companies, British and French interests. War then also broke out between Israel and Egypt, and Britain and France used that war as an excuse to get military involved with the hope of regaining the Suez Canal. The intervention was at first successful, with the British-French alliance occupying the canal. However, the United States refused to support the action, and the Soviet Union protested the action. Vehemently. Therefore, the British and French withdrew. And because of that, that showed, here it is, this is what's important. That Suez Canal crisis showed that any European military action could not operate independently of the United States. And that will be proved to be true right up through today. In Eastern Europe, Poland and Hungary began to try to act independently of Moscow and had differing degrees of success. In Poland, the Communist Party did not want to accept the Soviet Union's choice for their next leader. Soviet leadership even visited Warsaw to voice their opinions. They agreed upon Władysław Gomułka, who was a Polish communist. He tried to reverse the collectivization of farming. He also began to mend fences with the Roman Catholic Church. You know, Mr. Arlinghouse, that Poland is probably the most Catholic country in Europe. Yeah, it is. Which is, the Catholic Church was very instrumental, Pope John Paul II, in fighting communism in Poland. It was kind of used as a base of operations. Other Eastern Bloc nations began to get similar ideas. Hungary's action and sympathy for the Poles resulted in violence. A new government was installed in Hungary under Imre Nagy. Nagy wanted greater independence for Hungary. That's terrible. Look at that. And we're going to cut. Goodbye. Nagy wanted Soviet troops withdrawn and a neutral Hungary and withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact. That didn't happen. The Soviets invaded Hungary in 1956 and deposed Nagy, who was later executed, and installed Janos Kadar as its premier. Mr. Arlinghouse, I've got to bring another picture from when I was in. That was Prague, Czech Republic. Yeah, I'll have to bring my Hungary pictures as well. So much of this action was going on while the rest of the world was preoccupied with the Suez Crisis. The Americans were discredited by their inaction during the Hungary crisis. Yeah, that's true. You see, this is 1956 was the same year, Mr. Arlinghouse, the same year that the Suez Crisis occurred, same year that the situation in Hungary occurred, and the same year that the most famous person, important person in the world was born. Anyway, for approximately then, yeah, so the Americans were discredited. It looked like they had simply twiddled their thumbs when Hungary was being run over by the Soviet Union. So for approximately 25 years, the Eastern Bloc nations would be allowed almost no independent movement outside the Soviet ring of authority. All right, the next great peace summit was to be the Paris Peace Conference of 1960. It was a failure. There were many, as always, many bones of contention between the Soviets and the West. The Soviets, and here's one, the Soviets finally succeeded, see, in shooting down Mr. Arlinghouse, being such a rock and roller. I'm sure you've heard of the group U2, Bono U2. They were named after a United States spy plane. Yeah, the U2. Yeah, the United States surveillance of the Soviet Union before the age of satellites, of course. The United States surveillance of the Soviet Union used to depend on these planes, these very long, very fast, but very high flying jet planes called U-2s. And they could fly so high and so fast as they flew over the Soviet Union and take pictures. And the Soviet Union, of course, blamed the United States for spying on them. The United States said, "We're not spying on you. We don't have any planes that can do that." But the pilots of those planes, they were supposed to. I've got to shut up. They were supposed to, if anything ever happened to them, they were supposed to kill themselves. But the Soviets finally shot down one of those U-2s, and the pilot of the plane, Gary Powers, who did not kill himself, was captured. You know, he didn't kill himself, and so the Soviet Union said, "You guys are spying on us," and the United States said, "No, we're not." And then, of course, they produced Gary Powers. Khrushchev demanded an apology and got none. And let's start here tomorrow, Mr. Arlinghouse, shall we? I've got to go. Okay, and we are going to